Yeah, thank you, Milo. I just saw that. Let's try that again. Hello and welcome to Oscilloscope, home of lots of highly professional audio and music people. Um, Apologies for that. My name is Ed Wright. We also are joined this evening by Milo Taylor, who is, how would you describe your work as a composer, artist, musician, teacher? What do you do, Milo?
Yes, all of those things at the moment. So I'm just working on a project right now, which is exploring psychoacoustics. And I'm right now asking the question in my work, what is music? What's the minimum criteria by which something can be counted as music or not? So maybe some of that stuff we can explore over the course of while we're together here.
Absolutely. I mean, that in itself would be fascinating. For anybody who hasn't watched any of these before, prior to lockdown, we were a live event based in North Wales, essentially exploring experimental electronic music, whereby people would come along and play stuff, and members of the audience would chat with them about what they're doing and how things work and why people have chosen to do things. And when lockdown happened, we kind of went straight over into this sort of tech and carried on. So for those of you who are new to this, then welcome. For those of you who are not new, then welcome back. If you want to stick stuff in the chat, we have sort of the opportunity to put questions and things to artists, to have a natter with them, to play stuff, talk to them about their work afterwards, and hopefully have a really nice time, because we're all just kind of doing stuff for fun, really, and exploring what we can do and different ways of making sound and music in this kind of environment. So without further ado, I think then therefore let's jump in towards our first track, which, looking at my list on here, we have a piece by John Williams, who originally did live up here in North Wales, where quite a few of us are based, and is now living down in London, where Milo is based. And this is apparently a reworking of an old track of his, which, from the notes I've got from him, is or to reflect new realities, which is a wonderful kind of title and ambition, really, which I think could be really intriguing to see how an established work could be remolded in that way, whether that's a sort of a current sort of global societal thing, or whether that's a thing in his own particular world. I don't know. And it's entitled Cetus, and hopefully we're going to have a listen to it in a minute. Milo, anything you want to say or add about your work, or any links you've got for your stuff before we jump in on that?
Yeah, no, not at this moment. I'm quite happy to be a sort of a co-convener at this.
Okay, cool.
Moment. Yeah, perhaps at a future iteration, I can sort of put my artist hat on and show.
Absolutely. No, that'd be great, because as someone who's more than capable of some really quite interesting things, it would be great to be able to share that around. So, without further ado, then let's hear from John Williams and Cetus. Thank you very, very much, John.
Thanks, guys.
That was really quite peaceful and beautiful. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Milo, do you want to jump in and ask or say anything before I go off on one?
Sure. You mentioned before at the beginning of it, this is a reworking of a previous piece, and that, to quote Ed, that reflects new realities. What are those new realities that you're reflecting, and how has that manifested in the reworking of the piece as it originally was?
Sure. Well, the original piece, Ed may remember, is my first ever live piece at in Bangor in the Oscilloscope in Club TV.
Ah, I was wondering which one it was.
That's right. And it was, I tend
Yeah.
to perform with a minimal kit, which in this case was an iPad. And I throw away most of my old pieces, but I actually found the presets I saved within that app. And I was toying with it. And then Charles sent me a photo of the Orion Nebula, which actually you should have seen behind the two planets, the two fused planets, which didn't quite come through. Maybe StreamYard is compressing that out because it's very, very faint, which of course the light, of course, would be faint. So I'll put the original up on YouTube so that people can check out the original at some point in time.
Oh, please
so,
do. Yeah. Chuck
not
us
a
a link
problem.
for it as and when. Yeah.
Also, I think there was some strange multi-band compression going on because some of the spectral balances are slightly off. But same thing, I'll put it up. But the original piece was based on whale song, loosely, and was known, I think, as my whale piece from that night on. And then Charles sent me the Orion picture, and it got me thinking with all this recent work about Mars and going to other planets, sort of perhaps involving a first contact situation with alien life. And of course, we have alien life here on Earth, and first contact is freely available. Whales have an extremely complex social structure, extremely complex linguistic structure. We know that whale song changes from year to year, and it moves in kind of Mexican wave from Baja across the world's oceans. So they have an extremely complex language structure, and so first contact is there for us. And when can do the first contact, of course, humans tend to first kill the aliens and then eat them. So I think we need to work on that. But the whole, the Orion Suite, this is the first track of a suite of 3 tracks, is based on taking that initial concept of whale song and then moving it into the realm of communication. So in other words, how would our synthetic algorithms tackle communicating with whales initially by aping them? And you can hear in that piece, the whale song becomes increasingly synthetic as our alien probe attempts to communicate with these new aliens we've just met. And then it extends their song patterns. And towards the end, you're hearing purely alien hour song patterns as we attempt desperately to communicate with this dying species. And then, of course, the tick at the end I had to keep in because that was the signature part of the old piece. It was really a remix, so a fairly aggressive remix. And so that, in a nutshell, is the new sensibilities and the core of the original structure.
It's super interesting. It makes me think of this new book that I've just been reading, which is called The Atlas of Anomalous AI. Ooh. Which is, it talks about how we can think through artificial intelligence or our understanding of intelligence from this. It approaches it, for example, from the point of view of indigenous studies. You know, it talks about our relationships with other things in terms of kinship.
Yeah.
You know, so how we are kin with the natural world, but how artificial intelligence, we're all aware, I think, by now of the biases in facial recognition software, you know, or different linguistic AIs, and it's how we can conjure or think of our use of technologies in terms of kinship with these other species, rather than one as this continuing process of extraction and exploitation, maybe.
Exactly right. Exactly right. We have, as a species, we tend to have a certain firmware issues because our firmware hasn't been upgraded in several million years, 40,000 rather. And we're still cavemen, basically. And in the era of cavemen, a few people with sticks weren't going to make an awful lot of harm to the infrastructure we depend on, our food chain place. Whereas an awful lot of people with internal combustion engines and atomic weapons and biological weapons can make a significant dent in the tree on which we all stand. And I think it behooves us to learn to communicate with the aliens on our own planet and ourselves, who of course are other aliens in the Tower of Babel comparison, rather than moving to different planets to see if we can eat them.
Could you, in some ways then, if you, I'm writing about sort of electronic music and sustainable practice at the moment, and looking at things like Gregory Bates and Guattari, and there's drawing these connections between sort of mind, society, and environment. Yeah, so one individual mind, the society in which that mind exists, and then the broader kind of ecosystem. Could you talk a little bit about how, given the themes that you're addressing, how that translates to choices you make compositionally and the techniques and technologies that you use?
Okay, because I was dealing, the scenario basically is an alien probe from Orion attempting to speak to the only intelligent species on the planet, which of course are whales. There is a reason that alien encounters usually end up talking to the cows rather than the humans. I don't think humans in particular have distinguished themselves in their display of intellect in the last few thousand years, certainly the last few hundred. And so the alien probe from Orion arrives over the course of the three pieces. And this is where it's actually in the water attempting to communicate with the whales. So you start off with whale song as in field recordings. And then those are increasingly processed as we move towards the synthetic machineries, the AI's attempt to pattern recognize and synthesize. But of course, it always does it in a slightly quantized way because it's essentially digital, taking a very broad outline of digital because, of course, all analog processes are digital on a very tiny scale because they deal with cells exchanging molecules, which is inherently digital. But anyway, I'm using a gross simplification of digital. So if you'll notice, the initial runs are very, very quantized, very, very simplistic. And the harmonic texture is also very simplistic. And then that becomes, as pattern recognition algorithms kick in, it becomes increasingly complicated. And so you'll get quite a few of the sounds are actually fairly close analogs to the whale sound at the end, but they're entirely synthetic.
Because I was quite taken aback partway through with that, where all of a sudden, having had sort of fairly floaty, almost gestural things and some quite glitchy little delicate type things, you kind of all of a sudden had sort of, okay, that sounds like notes you could play on a keyboard, you know. I think it probably just shifted just over that perceptual level of kind of going from what in a Western sense we would refer to, I guess, as something kind of gestural or atonal, non-scale based. And all of a sudden it's clicked or clunked into that.
That's right. I mean, it's a
was that a deliberate transition, or was that just my own hearing?
No, it's entirely deliberate. I'm very pleased that you picked up on it. It's
okay.
It's basically because we have language is such an imperfect tool. If you look at Noam Chomsky's work on human use of language, which I think is the closest we get to how it actually works. Language is horribly, we do in the Tower of Babel, which is one of the reasons why every other human is an alien to another human, which is the beginning of our problems. And the Orion trilogy goes into this difficulty we have because we use language to communicate, and language is inherently A, personal, and B, very, very imperfect and imprecise. Maybe it would be better if we all sang to each other. I don't know. That's what whales do.
Yeah.
If we sang and danced at each other, that might be better. I don't know. It may be a richer communication. I have no idea. But that's the basis. That's really the basis of the Orion suite.
No, that's astounding. I mean, yeah. I mean, Milo, anything else you'd like to ask or say or try and dig in? Because I feel like I've probably got time for one more question, but we just, in fairness to other people on here, we need to
Absolutely
do stuff. But actually, yeah, we feel like we're on a bit of a roll. So yeah, Milo, have you got anything you'd like to ask? Or yeah.
I do, but I do also recognize I'm highly caffeinated right now.
Me too, by the way. Me too. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
I mean,
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Pete.
I'm going to jump in with my caffeinated enthusiasm.
Yes,
It
do
is
it.
going deep.
Do it by all means.
Which
You
is
know me,
to,
Rob.
and I'll give you more space next time, Ed, for the next.
No,
the next presenter.
absolutely. I mean, it's really nice to actually be able to facilitate these things sometimes and not just be constantly going me, talk, because I'm well aware that we sometimes have guest
Very
co-hosts and I get
Very
overexcited. So yeah, by all means, Milo, you go.
Well, it's very, very kind of you. I make my question to you, John, and I'm going to ask you perhaps the same one, Ed, later on, is this question I have about music. You know, what is music? What's the minimum criteria by which something needs to comply with in order for it to be counted as musical? So whale song, for example, John, would you characterize that as music? And if so, what would be your thinking behind it? And if not, what would be your thinking behind it?
Absolutely. I regard it absolutely as music, and my definition of music is organized sound, organized noise. I view myself as a noise sculptor, as an artist, really.
So that the Varese, you know, the Western white privileged composer tradition is the one you'd clearly put yourself into.
I'm not quite
Ouch.
sure.
I think we saw
sure
that bear trap coming a while back.
I'm not quite, unless I've expressed myself poorly, I'm not quite sure. I mean, organized noise can be organized, of course, along many different tracks. So you can organize it atonally, arrhythmically, and therefore, when does that become noise? One man's music can be another man's noise, as has frequently been levied at me. I think that depends on how you define organization and how you define noise. And so I would actually refute that.
I mean, it's a direct Varese quote, isn't it not? Organized sound.
Yeah, it depends. Again, it depends on how you define those terms. I define them as basically organized sound. In other words, I have an intention, which is what I explained for this, and I then organize sounds to express that intention. So it's organized noise. Now, somebody else might reflect on that purely as noise, and that's fine, obviously, because it means I haven't achieved my goal of communication with that particular person. But as we all know, if somebody speaks French to someone who only speaks German, there's going to be a disjunction. And it depends on my particular musical language, which we hope is more universal perhaps than English is or Spanish is. We don't know what it is, but the pentatonic scale in theory is more universally appreciated by humans. Rhythm tends to be universally appreciated by humans, although that piece was relatively rhythmic until the last 50%. So yeah, I mean that's how we define it. So I'm at variance. I'm at one with his words, but variance with his definition. If that makes any sense.
So according to, I hope I'm not being, I didn't set up a deliberate bear trap there. It is an authentic inquiry that I'm kind of involved in. So by those, so without doubt, you know, whales are organizing sound in some way. But I mean, this is a criticism that has been leveled at Cage, for example, that the aestheticization of all sound as music is somewhat of a kind of a colonial gesture, you know, claiming that to be music in for what, I suppose, for what purposes, and what agenda does that kind of serve in some ways?
That gets very, very interesting, because we then move from communication to the intention, so from words to intention. And I would suggest that we move from intention to results, because the result, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Intentions are phrased in words, and yet the exit door from that is called result.
So why, for example, would you characterize, or how could one characterize whale song as music rather than speech?
Because it's, in terms of my definition, it's organized sound. Speech is organized sound. It's highly organized sound. But speech can be very musical. Speak to anybody who's watched, for example.
Oh, for sure. But speaking of sort of, say, Chomsky and linguistics, you know, that for sure, like language, yeah, there is a thing called language and speech, and there is a thing called music, and they are distinct.
Although I'm not.
Or the question is, you know, am I making music now? It's not my intention to be musicalizing.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. I don't think that's an important distinction. I think it's a kind of it's almost a contrived distinction, in that what's important is the impact that the music has, because I think all music, certainly as far as I'm concerned, and again, this is my definition, is sound organized to achieve communication, communication organized to achieve a result. I'm hoping, now this again should be chunked between intention and result. I'm hoping that my Cetus, my Orion trilogy, encourages people, A, to feel good, but also to feel that we can do more. And as humans, I'm sure that we can. We can actually start to look at the disjunct between our words and our intentions, and our intentions and our results. One of the other pieces in the Orion trilogy focuses on speeches of famous orators, and how the results of those are at a huge variance to the words, the marvelous words contained in the speeches. And we need to work on results. If the results are there in terms of preserving the species that we depend on in ways we don't yet recognize, to preserve our tree of life and the whole planet's tree of life, the complex web of relationships, then I think it behooves us to work on the results and not necessarily the words or even the intentions.
And on the strength of that, I feel that given that we have a deep dive episode on the 15th of each month, I think we've just set up the next, possibly the next one. You know, I think we just need to start unpacking some of this properly in a large.
I need a gulp of coffee.
Yes, I think you probably need some coffee, and and we also need to move on to other artists and their work. But
thank you
John,
very much, guys.
Thank you for an amazing piece. You know,
thank you very much for having me on, and the opportunity to broadcast it.
I know, that's great. And hopefully, as and when you get a chance to have a link for it when it's on YouTube, because for those of us watching on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, generally the audio on YouTube tends to be far better than what goes out to the live streaming or Facebook.
I'll actually upload it during the program and then give.
I mean, if you get the chance, if it gets up there, then stick it in. We've got our private chat on here, and I know Rob looks after us really well with throwing up comments along the bottom, some of which have obviously been lovely.
And been very kind. Thank you very much.
They have, yeah. If you get the chance in the next however long, chuck it on there, and I'm sure Rob will do the honours. You know,
will do. Thank you very much once again.
So, John, thank you very much.
John, thank you for your gracious responses as well.
That's
very
all right.
interesting.
I mean, it was actually fascinating to delve deeper into that, because I think music has a real, in my life, music has a real purpose. It's not just entertainment. At its best, it can be both, of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
John, thank you so much. Take care. Cool. I like that. That's what a way to start, you know.
Fantastic piece. A fantastic piece.
Absolutely fantastic piece. And really intriguingly delicate and thought through, or sort of unashamedly delicate, I felt, so yeah. Next up, we have work by Adam Boyce, who, for people around North Wales, may know him as Electric Coast, who's somebody who's been associated with Oscilloscope and doing stuff on and off for several years now. Back in the day when we were in the greenhouse, he was sort of experimenting, starting out, and releasing singles on floppy disks, and we're all thoroughly enjoying that. And I know Charles, who's teching for us, has still got one of those kicking around somewhere. And yeah, so I understand he's currently stuck in a traffic jam trying to get back from work. So if he's not here to chat with us after his piece, then hopefully he can join people in the comments afterwards and reply to anything. But if not, hopefully Milo, you'll join with me in just having a natter about his work as well and reacting to things. And yeah, it's an AV piece of his. I think, like many of us as composers, we all tend to be more at home with the visual stuff, or sorry, the audio stuff rather than the visual, because we do that. But actually, let's just have a quick look, because something on the messages is going ping like crazy at me, and I don't know what it is. Just make sure it's not Adam. Okay, yeah. And yeah, so let's enjoy Electric Coast track entitled Untitled, which seems like a wonderful paradox to me. So Adam Boyce, everybody. So I'm guessing by the look of it, we don't have Adam with us, but having been initially possibly what was inadvertently disparaging about the video side of it, I've got a message from Charles who texts for us, who saying, yeah, this is actually the actual frame rate of things. I'm really quite intrigued in that was very obviously a deliberate choice and juxtaposition to put what felt like very kind of journeying cinematic music against this slightly jarring thing. I don't know quite. I mean, what do you think, Milo? Did you like it?
Well, took a few notes along the way to sort of help navigate this, and I suppose one of the trying to continue, I suppose, the themes or that we're speaking about with John about what is music. I suppose one of the things that I'm, in terms of sort of a theoretical position or from a critical kind of perspective, there's some general questions that I'm interested in exploring when it comes to media. Is like, what are we looking at? What are we listening to? And what are we hearing? And I think some interesting slippages between those different things that occur, as John was saying, in everyday sort of life. And I think those complexities of language is associated with that. But when it comes to experiencing the world as we are right now, these ultra mediated types of ways, that sort of the format lend this particular, and what are the idiosyncrasies and the phenomenological encounter of this particular interaction, and the way of presenting work, outside of. So the Metamorphosis Festival, for example, recently in Bangor, was exploring this idea of like embodied co-presence. That is being the characteristic of say, for example, how I imagine Oscilloscope nights to be before lockdown and many other kind of performance events. The character, the quality is about being together in a space, and that's what makes performance specific. And we're in a very different environment kind of now, with a whole bunch of other opportunities and contradictions. So the complete, so thinking and listening, asking the question, what is it that I'm looking at? What is it that I'm listening to? And then at some odds to that act of listening is like, well, what then am I hearing in that listening? And there's just a completely admittedly random notes that I've sort of come up with.
Go for it.
In terms of like a subjective experience, is like, it sort of began for me very oceanic or tidal was the kind of sound, and I was trying to, and I was experiencing something like being on a beach on the Llyn Peninsula, where I spend a lot of my time, but then it was like I'm on the surface of something, some digitally rendered something. Is this?
I almost got the feel, and I know I've been looking at the messages with the chat between us doing tech stuff, that it almost felt like the start of the demo of Magic Carpet from back in the day for anybody who ever played anything on a 486, because you just had to get that processor to be able to. But it felt like that. It was sort of somehow it almost fitted into this sort of weird. Say about co-presence, it felt like from somebody from that sort of thing, it felt like you kind of almost had some ownership of that side of it, because you sort of got a reference almost. I don't know.
And it did feel it was very demo scene. Charles is saying in the it has this the kind of the 8-bit aesthetic, which I'm looking at the Bandcamp of Electric Coast, and it has this sort of vaporwave. I haven't heard any of the music, but the visual design of it anyway seems to have this. Well, Flashback Liberty, for example, is just one piece that I'm looking at sort of right now, that it has this, there's reference to, the vaporwave, or maybe some of the work that PC Music are doing or have been doing over the last few years, perhaps. But then we sort of went through this oceanic kind of kind of world, and then we sort of start encountering these sort of Shinto shrine, and then we go past a well, and we go underneath this archway, and we encounter the monolith again. You know,
I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that. Yes,
the Kubrick monolith. It's there, vibrating and speaking to us through time, but it kind of manifests itself as some kind of portal, and then we find ourselves in Area 51. You know, kind of going along the highway, and we have the lens flare, you know, being shown. And then my last note is that we meet the purple angel spiral somehow. So I don't know, if this is sort of meeting the ghost in the 8-bit machine somehow, or the dot mod gods, you know. But that's how I experience it. And it is for me. I'm always interested in these pieces which are like, I don't know what it is I'm looking at. I don't know what it is that I'm listening to, and I don't know what it is that I'm hearing. There's something very interesting and sort of liberating about that, you know, just accepting the experience, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, I was quite shocked as to how, on one level, how sort of clunky some of it felt in a very clearly deliberate way, and also on a larger level how clearly planned and paced all those things were. So all of a sudden you're kind of going, okay, this is a thing, and you felt quite clearly led on a journey that you're slowly being more convinced that actually there really is something going on here. And I mean, for me, it brought to mind, I can't remember which one it was or where it was, but there was a letter that ended up published in Computer Music Journal, which I'm sure you probably end up reading and whatnot every so often. And the basic overall gist was that if we all assume that we all have competence at what we're attempting to do, because otherwise why would you put it out in the world, then actually it unleashes a whole thing of going, okay, just trust this, and it's something amazing. And this sort of wonderful pacing of kind of, which almost felt like it was sort of spiraling in a sense, and you had this quite long oceanic thing, as you put it, and then you had this and then you got onto this kind of, I would say road, but highway seems more appropriate, even from my very anglicised tongue, from the way it looked, and then sort of zapped into this other place, and this, I found that really quite intriguing, in that you sort of, I really want to kind of go back and actually rewatch it and try and unpack some of what was going on there. And how that fitted with the music, because I feel that we've probably done it a bit of a disservice getting that sucked into the visuals as well, which I think we all do, you know. But actually, I think it's partly because some of that fitted really well with what was going on. And it was a complete experience that we're looking at. And just using probably the shorthand of being able to talk about this thing that looked like that had the other things happening at the same time.
And so maybe, we can talk shortly about maybe the audio visual, but just riffing off using the word sort of clunky, and it makes me think it's an interesting word, clunky, and sort of competence. And on the one hand, you know, glitch can be quite, by now, sort of a cliche or a stylistic affectation, or those choices made about genre conventions. You know, if you're talking about Magic Carpet, what you were talking about, you know, that a lot of work references a particular scene or a particular retro world in one way or another, you know. So although there is somewhat of a danger, I think, of cliche, I think there's the other side of that, perhaps, is that the idea of the clunky, or the idea of lack of competence in the anti-virtuoso kind of approaches, makes me think of, and put this into somewhat of a political kind of bracket, but like the Heideggerian idea of Dasein and being in the world. And he will talk a lot about like the moment of breakdown is when the nature of your relationship with the environment revealing itself. I'll use the example of someone using a hammer and nails, and you're bashing away, just doing the job or whatever, and then you hit your thumb with the hammer, and that moment, your being with the world breaks down, and you start to ask yourself, why am I doing this, and where is the boss, and why am I not getting paid enough, and what is this stupid house for anyway? So maybe this idea of of the glitch and the clunkiness and the super compressed pixelated rendering, could it be potentially kind of like questioning, commenting upon this lack of bodily co-presence, and rather than creating something which is just an analog of that, let's pretend we're all together, it's trying to comment on the fact that we're very definitely not together, and what a tragedy that is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a wonderful viewpoint on it, and I feel that hopefully, without wishing to chicken out on an answer or a comeback to that, hopefully Adam will join us in the comments at some point on that, because I think to delve into that and try and second guess him might be unfair.
Yeah, of course.
But also, I mean, it brings to mind you were saying about the sort of banging things with the hammer. Actually ended up watching a really intriguing, simple thing on YouTube earlier today. It was talking about the Chinese tea ceremony, and about how there are things that you do that are not rituals, but are things that you make out of kind of artisanship, or because you've done something, you practice something many times, and talking about how you can, as an apprenticed carpenter, somebody can tell you as many times how to actually hit a nail, but it's the person who's done it for 60 years who can then go, bang, that's gone straight in. And you can understand and you can have that theory for however long, but actually to do that takes that certain amount of practitionership rather than practice, I think I'd say, so that it's actually within you rather than just learning. And I think, knowing from Adam's stuff, he is absolutely capable of doing different intriguing things, and actually I really want to unpack that and see what that's commenting on, and I wish he was here. It's a very cool thing. And Adam, if you're out there, I hope you managed to get back from work, and if you have a chance to jump in the comments, that would be great, because I really enjoyed that. It's an interesting piece. It's challenging in places, don't get me wrong, but actually I think that's what makes it interesting. So yeah, should we move on, Milo? And
let's move on, indeed.
Yeah, totally. So next up, I've managed to somehow lose one of my things in a billion different streams of what we've got going on. So next up, we have an ensemble piece working under the name of Reshifter, or at least I hope it's Reshifter, because there are many backslashes hiding in there, comprising Nick Huang, Jeff Herriot, Eric Sheffield, Anthony Marasco, who I apologise if I've murdered your surname, Anthony, and Anna Vilesing or Valesing, depending on whereabouts in the world you're coming from. And there is a track which is entitled Ship of what I assume is Theseus, we seem to be without vowels in the title. So yeah, and it's a remote performance piece, which actually seems to weirdly fit into this embodiment idea that you were talking about, and shared space, for all those things. And yeah, it's based on the idea of mythology and the thought of identity, and also working together and recycling and reworking data and redigesting things. So maybe there's something within deeper and more meta hiding with the mythology idea. So yeah, without wishing to hopefully not wishing to dunk my feet too deep in the concrete and tell it all wrong, we have Reshifter and what I assume is Ship of Theseus, and I'm sure they will join us and tell us if I've got that wrong in a minute. Hello. Thank you so much, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. So with us we have Nick and Jeff and Anna and Eric, who are doing things there, and what a thing, you know. Thank you so much, everybody. Do you want to? I don't know. Do you want to tell us or explain something of what was going on there? Because I mean, clearly the sort of ship of Theseus, as somebody's already mentioned in the comments, that's such a loaded thing that, as mythologically we go, was that coincidence, or was that just something you landed on? Or yeah, would you mind unpacking that, perhaps?
I will
For it,
let Nick start.
Yeah.
You're gonna let me start. Oh, yeah. I think that we were going with that sort of like thought experiment of having a piece that was collaborative, in that everyone would be going on this musical journey, and we would have elements that some of us could take and use either by sampling or some parameter or quality of something that someone previously played and reuse it for a different purpose. It could be visual or musical. And we wanted to think about what would happen at having many people in the ensemble take maybe a visual cue or what they heard and reuse it and see what it would be like at the end. Is it the same piece that we originally started with? Because this whole piece that we performed, Ship of Theseus, has a lot of parts to it. And there's visual score elements that each of us are sort of working off of that we are familiar with, but at each performance, the order and responsibility are different.
Yes, to build on that, I would say, you know, we have these cards, and the structure of it is sort of a palindrome. We have, in this case, we each saw we saw 6 cards that were 100 or so seconds approximately, and then the first 3 reverse on the way past. So we have the first 3, and then we do 3, 2, 1. And during that time, some of the time I'm making sound, and some of the time I'm using my control device and my max patch to change parameters of my performance, but also of their patches. So, like if I change a knob, it'll impact Nick's, some aspect of Nick's performance patch, or some aspect of Eric's or Anna's or Tony's. And so, a little bit of the Ship of Theseus concept is that when you get to the second half of the piece, where you're presumably playing the same score page again, your instrument may not be the same as it was before because someone has changed it and you just kind of have to adapt to that. Now, we're not obviously playing the exact same musical material on the front and the back or interpreting it based on what we're hearing, but the score and the patch work together such that, and our collaborative system work together so that it may not be the same on the way back just because it's been adjusted by somebody. Or in my case, like I'm going on changing knobs on my Moog, and by the time I go to the back, I have to remember where I set them and adjust.
So is there like a set patch that goes with the score then, or is this a?
Yeah, there's a score that we each contributed images for. And they're essentially just, cards and shapes and designs and ideas. And then it's random which ones we get every time when we play.
Wow. And I think that probably answers the other question in my head, which was to how or to what level these things are purely improvised or composed and what have you, because I think, I don't know about you, but I mean, I know I've spent quite a bit of time, especially over the lockdown, doing improvising things online with people. But by the sound of it, you've actually, between you, got a far more in-depth kind of collaborative method and process for doing that in a sort of remote kind of way, which looks and seems really good. I mean, I'm sure I saw, Nick, you posted a sort of .io thing somewhere in the messages earlier when we were chatting, which I haven't had a chance to look at, with the collab collabhub.io. I mean, how have you been developing that between you, and what does that do for you as creative people?
Eric?
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So Collab Hub is, as you said yourself, throughout the last year and a half, we've been looking for ways to just be able to play with each other. And we're all in different parts. We're all in the U.S., but we're all in different parts.
Yeah.
Ann and I are in upstate New York. Nick and Jeff are in Wisconsin. And Tony, who couldn't join us today, he's in Texas. So just kind of by coincidence, at the beginning of the shutdown, we had started work on this platform which is Collab Hub, that would let us perform together. We weren't trying to recreate audio streaming because there's already tools available for that. We were just trying to create a way for us to send data to each other. So we were thinking about, sort of the League of Automatic Composers, the hub, like that style of everyone sort of has their own setup, but we have ways to influence each other's instrument or processing or whatever by sending data to each other. So Collab Hub was just what we sort of developed to facilitate that. And, of course, so we've been playing with it over the last year and a half, primarily with this piece, because the piece is sort of randomized and we can change the duration, we can change the sequence of images. It is a little different every time we play it. So we have essentially been doing it almost weekly, doing live streams with it just as a way to have a jam. Basically, it's like the blues jam at the local club once a week. It's like, hey, we all get a chance to all play together.
I'm there.
And we've also been able to then also share this tool with some other people and see what they've been doing with it, which has been really great.
I can say for me, one of the fun things, I wasn't involved in the development of Collab Hub, but I've worked with all of them, and I used to do jams with Eric and Anna actually years ago at a public access TV station in Madison, Wisconsin, and we would just go and set up our stuff and jam on a random night. And so it kind of reminds me of that, but we're just remote, and we've got these different parameters that we've come up with. So it was amazing for me when I jumped into their collaborations, as this system existed that allowed us to do stuff in different ways. And as I said, the fascinating part for me has been not just the weekly jams, but the fact that they'll change aspects of my patch and then I have to adjust to them on the fly. And, sometimes Eric will change the pitch of my instrument. And then I'm like, I'll go to play something and I'm like, oh crap, that's not what I was trying to play at all. And I'll like have to readjust because I didn't see that he'd done that. And sometimes he'll do it even as I'm playing, and Tony has access to my filter and whatever. So it's just fun to have people getting in and doing stuff with your instrument. It's like a different kind of improvisation, although it's in this, the same, world as like the Cobras and all that kind of stuff, where you got some sort of card based system. So.
Oh, that's really cool. I mean, much as I could, my brain's properly exploding right now, going, so many things. I'm just aware that I've talked for quite a long time and probably trampled over both Milo and Anna. So do either of you two want to say or ask or do anything? Because, it was sort of,
I mean, I'd be happy to talk, but
go for it. I mean, it'd be great to hear from you. Yeah.
I mean, sure. So I was kind of brought in to do some visual stuff, and the concept of the piece, what was really compelling to me was this idea of translation, and is the message the same at the beginning as at the ending if multiple people are interpreting and translating it. So when these guys are getting images, either for music or control, they're making decisions based on what they see, and then these things get shared amongst the group and reinterpreted, and the meaning shifts over time. So I took those graphic images and I made just like foam objects based on the score. And my part of the performance is to basically manipulate those foam objects in a little box with lights. The guys in the ensemble can control my lighting elements. So that's kind of how I'm roped into the real-time control message situation. And I'm basically just taking the graphic element of the score, translating it into the physical world, translating it back into 3D geometry using software, and then that's getting sent to the group. So they're kind of interpreting all of that. And that's kind of how I approached this idea of, is this the same as an image, as geometry, as sound, kind of going into these layers of meaning and translation.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's sort of got this whole feedback loop thing going on in itself, and wow.
Yeah, I would say that's a key piece of the whole thing, is that idea of one thing goes to somebody else and comes back again. And in the case of Anna, she took the score and made other things, and then in some cases, I'll control things that I don't even know what they're going to do. Like I'll change a control value. I can tell when, for example, Anna has visuals, and I can tell when Eric is making sound and when Tony's making sound, or etc. But I'm not always sure what my controls are going to do when I send them out. I know what they affect, but I'm not always sure if that aspect of it is on or not. And so there's this like sending things out to people as a piece of it, and an uncertainty, but part of the fun. And because we have moments when we're supposed to be making control or making sound, it kind of balances out the piece for us. Like the structure we've designed has kind of balanced it out, even though it's not always evenly balanced across the group. We might all be making sound, or we might all have control. Like, what do you do when we're all in control? we weren't, I don't think, in this performance. We never had that situation, but and we've changed the duration of this piece too. It's adjustable in the sense that you can just add more or less time and scale it up or down. And so we made a 10-minute version for this, and I thought that was I was nervous that it was going to be too short, but it was interesting.
It felt really tight. It felt really quite refined,
It did to me too. I agree. It ended up being the right size, weirdly, but sometimes you just get lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful comment there, which I don't know if we should put as a question now or I mean, tell you what then, Milo, do you want to pick up on Paul's comment, which is along the bottom, and maybe run with it with something else you want to expand on or ask?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a question.
Just a way of getting you back in,
Very sneaky.
Yeah, totally.
Hi, guys, everybody. Thank you for joining us from the other side of the pond. Great to have you here with us. So the question from the chat is, how do you go about releasing or recording such a track, since in theory there is no definitive version of it? Is that an intention that you have, or are you working in a different sort of space?
Yeah, for this, we're definitely, I think, so, all of us have other recording projects that we've worked on, and Jeff and I are working on a new album right now, and we sort of are struggling with that exact question of like, how do we turn these demos that we came up with last month into the definitive versions of what we want these songs to be. And this particular performance, this piece, Ship of Theseus, it's not really in that category. I think we've performed it only in remote live streamed contexts. It's only been written and performed since everything shut down. And although things are starting to become a bit normal again, festivals are starting to run again in person, we haven't even really discussed this. Like, how is this going to progress from this point? Like, is there a definitive version of it? This is a long way of saying I don't think there's really a goal of making a definitive version, but we definitely are trying to refine it every time we play it. And one thing that was new to the piece over the last year was turning into this palindrome, which, as something that's mostly improvised, I think has helped a lot for us to, if you're playing a gesture that you like in section 2, you think, oh, I need to remember this because I really like this and I want to bring it back at the end. And that's, that's the kind of stuff that good improvisers always do. But I don't know that there's going to be a definitive version of this, and we'll just keep refining it. We have, how many versions would you say we have on your YouTube channel right now, Nick? Like 30?
Yeah, around 30. Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's almost like antithetical to the kind of heart of the piece, at least for me, to say that there ever would be a definitive version. I mean, it's kind of at the core of this to embrace or try to facilitate liveness and co-presence and throwing wrenches in things and creating opportunities for response. So I think that that's something we try to encourage and embrace rather than work out or refine away, because we want that liveness, that agency, that kind of as if we were in a live situation with each other on the stage. That's kind of how this all got pushed forward in some ways.
Yeah, if I can just, so I have some questions that come with that, and it's around meaning making in terms of an art practice, given that in the context that we live in, and just, you know, when you use this word as if, you know, not it's actually two words, isn't it? You know, that obviously, you know, that as ifness is kind of what I'm sort of pointing at a little bit. So I'm going to sort of just touch on a few sort of points, but the question that I'm sort of posing to you is, what does network performance specifically offer the performer and the audience? You know, not within the as if, but embracing the environment. You've done it over 30 times, you know, if it's not being published onto YouTube. So the idea of on what levels are you creating meaning from performers, and on what layers are you creating meaning for the audience? So that's where I'm sort of going to with this. You know, where does this type of network performance, what does it offer you as performers, and what does it offer an audience? Getting to that, it feels like there's a lot of happening in this. So from an audience member, we have this immediate phenomenological encounter with none of the backstory about a graphics score or your intentions with the technology. We just experience the stream. And the question is relatively, and I'm sure each of you will have different perspectives on this, is there are many layers happening, and maybe there's some issues about meaning making that potentially there's maybe too much occurring at any one time. So for example, you know, is your emphasis musical? Is your emphasis sonic? You know, are you aspiring to this question I have, music? You know, is that important to you or not? It doesn't have to be at all. You know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe that changes from performance to performance. Yeah, is your interest then in the sonic or the sound of things? Is your interest in the visual? You know, is your interest in the reactive? So it's not just a visual linear playback, but there's also seems to be, you know, feedback then in terms of like the reactive nature of the visuals. Are your interests relational? You know, the relationships between yourselves and the relationships between the ensemble and the audience. Are your interests informatic? You know, that perhaps is it the fact that someone's control is controlling someone else's parameters. Obviously, we're blind to that in terms of the audience, but that may or may not be of interest to you. So in terms of me, in terms of the meaning making, there's such a range of different layers of things that I could be focused upon. I'm, as an audience member, a little bit kind of going, what is this about? So I'm sure, you know, so you know, going back to the question in a nutshell, you know, what does this type of network performance offer you individually as performers or an ensemble, and what meaning making does that offer an audience?
You know, I'll speak for myself. I think one of the things you mentioned is that it's probably a little different for all of us, and I think that is true. In part because it has become a practice. A big part of the meaning for us is in the playing. You know, like I get together and play soccer with some friends every week, and my goal when I play soccer is to have fun for, you know, an hour and a half and to get some exercise. We keep score, but no one cares who wins. You know, and it's small goals. You know, so there's a little bit of the practice of this is that, you know, like we get together, it's like we got to go play. That's a big piece of the fun. Now, obviously, when we're putting it out for people to experience in a performance, we want it to be an interesting musical visual experience too. And the hope is that in part the practice yields that, you know, in the same way that sometimes you watch a soccer game and it's not that good, and sometimes it's amazing. You know, like the Euro final was kind of unfortunate. Like it was just sort of a dull game. Forget who won and lost. Just wasn't that interesting. But a lot of the games leading up to it were really amazing.
Well, it was great from a Welsh perspective, but anyway.
Okay.
It's all right. I'm English living in Wales, which makes it even more confusing.
But you know what I mean? Like the practice, the game, you know, you go out and you play, and to some extent they're better than others. And really it was like, you know, that's just sort of that's part of the process. And so I think a big part of this piece for me is the process of doing it. And it's about continuing to have a relationship with people from afar. You know, these are great friends of mine. And so it's a delight to do this every week. But I can also say that, like, we've been honing the piece over time. Afterwards, we look back at our performances and say, well, what yielded a more interesting sonic or visual result? And that's how we've tried to set up the score. In terms of the palindromes, we've adjusted the parameters in our patches so that they can have the right impact. We've adjusted the way our lighting controls work and various things so that over time we feel like we've refined it into a more interesting sonic and visual experience. But that happens through this iterative process. It's different for me, you know, as a composer. When I'm writing stuff that's scored more traditionally, I'm thinking about different kinds of things. Although I'm very interested in the idea of serendipity in general. Like I've been part of what I try to create when I make pieces is find opportunities for wonderful things to happen, as opposed to perfectly prescribing that they'll happen. And I think that's a little bit, at least from my perspective, what I'm hoping for in this experience is that we just have these moments that come together. And that's what happens when you get improvisation, you know, like just the practice of free improvisation. Like Eric will do something cool today. In this performance, he did something cool with his guitar. And I was like, oh, I can do this other thing that will work really well with that. And so I started playing this glitchy sort of sound that I thought was fun opposite his noisy guitar. And that's just, I think it was cool sonically, but it was also fun for me to discover it and try to create that.
That's really cool. It's really intriguing answer. I think because we're sort of looking at time and people and things, should we just kind of go round the table for people to add things to that? I mean, logically, where we are, I mean, I'd suggest we probably go anti-clockwise. And do people want to expand on Jeff's answer? Or
so who's that? Me?
It's probably you, you know, because otherwise it would be me if we went clockwise, and I'm not going to answer it. You know. So yeah, I mean, building on Milo's question, I'm sure Jeff has probably stolen the easy and the good answers. But
Yes.
if you want to expand,
very unfair.
Yeah. Oh no. We all know what we mean, you know. I mean, if you guys want to expand from your own practice, and
I think
we all do things differently. So yeah.
I'm the non-musician of the group, so I'll keep this short. I think on top of what Jeff said, and on top of my interest also in kind of serendipity and unpredictability and error and failure, I'm really interested in those kinds of things. For me, what is interesting about this is that my instrument is a computer, right? I try and bring a lot of physical and analog things into that, but ultimately the computer is my instrument. So it's a part of a bigger kind of discourse when we talk about network music. Like, what does a digital instrument, what does a computer, what does the network afford us that traditional musical practices maybe don't? And I think there's a trend sometimes to look at a tool like CollabHub and say, how do we make this feel like we are doing a live performance on a stage? And for me, the more interesting question is, what does this give us that is different from that? Like, how is this going to facilitate or augment our practice in a way that is unique and gives us a tool that isn't trying to be on stage together in a physical space? What can it do beyond that? Or how can it kind of reconfigure what we're doing? So thinking about the network as an instrument was a very interesting part of this for me, and thinking about how do we feel co-located or like we're sharing a sense of time and space through the network, because we all have done things together in physical space. We've all done a lot of improvisation in pre-COVID times, but this was an opportunity to really dive into what is this thing that we're using now, this digital kind of network communication thing, and how can we kind of get as much out of it as possible through this project. So that was interesting for me.
And what have you had any sort of initial reflections or findings on that question? I think it's exactly the question that I'm interested in.
I have found personally that as I iterate and refine and develop, I will go back and look at, performance 6 instead of performance 30. And I'll say, like, what was I doing then? What am I doing now? And I'll kind of weigh those against each other. And I'm finding that as I refine and iterate, I'm losing a lot of what I really liked about what I was doing. I started to, it's hard not to engineer out the things that you didn't like. And in the process, you kind of engineer out those moments of spontaneity and interest that emerged. So part of the lesson for me is that with a computer, you can iterate and iterate and iterate and build in fail safes and take out a lot of the risk because you're creating the instrument yourself. And it's tempting to do that, but it isn't always, it takes out for me some of the meaning, some of the most interesting elements of what I'm trying to pursue, if that makes sense.
That makes as a violinist who regularly plays out of tune, that makes perfect sense.
She mentioned that Anna's dissertation was about risk and failure in performance and the importance of, remembering those aspects in designing digital instruments and designing, anybody who's done anything with technology or done anything with coding is always trying to work out the bugs, eliminate the possibilities for things to go wrong. And I think a lot of what she's saying is that you can lose things along the way if you're removing all those elements. Like you said, your guitar goes out of tune, or sorry, your violin is out of tune. When I was playing on that actual performance, when we were playing, I in this situation, I happen to be the only one who's playing an actual sort of resonating body instrument. I have the guitar, but everything else is electronic, and I'm still doing some things electronically. And a couple of the things in that performance even were a mistake I made, right? Like my pickup selector was in the wrong spot. And then I started kind of playing with that a little bit. And that went into that particular improvisation, that particular version of the piece. Anna and Jeff have already said a lot of great things. I think I just want to add sort of from the audience perspective, one thing that has come up. Some of the stuff has been very, very just practical, like things that every composer, every songwriter is thinking about. When we started out, everyone had a different instrument. Everyone was responsible for, we didn't have a standard ensemble of a string quartet where, okay, the low end is taken care of, the mid range is taken care of, the high end is taken care of. One person's playing, probably the more melodic elements. We didn't have any of that sort of stuff. So we definitely made those kind of refinements along the way. And that had to do with listening back, both at, listening in real time as a performer and listening back to it later of it just needs to sound better, that we just need to do more things with our setups. We sort of thought about it's a constant challenge as people who do stuff with technology and art of this cool idea for a technology, and then you realize, oh, it doesn't actually sound very good. So we did a lot of that stuff throughout the process of getting the foundation in place of how our system was going to work together, and then gradually making changes to our own individual setups or suggesting things to each other that would just make it a better sounding experience, something that was sonically better. And that's one of the huge benefits of having been able to do this 30 times and make slight adjustments over time. And I think from a very practical perspective, we present it now with 4 of us on the screen, off our thumbnails off to one side and Anna's visuals to the left. And our instinct initially when we were performing this was the visuals should obviously be the focus. That's all anyone should see. And some of the comments I got from some people who had viewed it in the past, friends of mine, were just sort of like, well, I want to know that you're there. I want to know that this is live. It should, as an audience member, I should know that it's live. And that was something that we added in. That is partially facilitated by the network. The fact that we're remote but are using these network technologies, we can say like, hey, here we are, like we're on stage, right? You can experience this hopefully as an audience member as seeing these people from 4 disparate places sort of being on stage together.
Absolutely. So yeah, just pass round in the final bit of our arc, and to go back to Nick, who first got in contact with us, and thank you very much for bringing it as a piece. Anything else you want to add, or any reflections on it as a work?
In terms of answering Milo's question, I think that if the answer would be yes for almost every question they asked, just examining it in a different time slice. Like, because Eric and I have been working on the Collab Hub as a tool for so long, like that in and of itself I thought was really interesting in terms of how does numbers go over the network and what does it mean when you get it, and we've thought about in this piece itself, when we think about it more narrowly during performance, there is inherent network lag and in what we send over in terms of data, and then also what we hear, and we've always had to compensate for that in our own sort of way. And my instrument in this ensemble is a sampling instrument, so I take in sounds that are previously played during the performance to reuse as my own instrument. And I'm sort of getting lost in my train of thought. But there has been versions that we've created for this piece that involved also audience participation, so that not only are you just watching, but you can pull up a browser and are instigating some sounds on the browser to play along with us. And those are for different performances that we've done, but we've tried to go back and forth in terms of just like the questions that Mila had, like what is the audience's role? How are they absorbing it? I think that some of it is, maybe understanding what is going on in the network in terms of what data is getting sent. But for me, when we're performing, it's all about playing together with my collaborators. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? How can I play off each other? And all of those things, like the meta stuff about what is this number getting sent to the network, sort of goes away during performance time. But as a larger whole, maybe if the audience understood it, they might get something more out of it. But I don't think it's necessary.
Okay, that's really intriguing. I mean, thank you so much. I mean, that feels like it's left on a bit of a cliffhanger almost.
I think Jeff is about to say something.
No, I wasn't going to say.
No, you got the mic going
Yeah,
there. Yeah. Last little bit, so we can just try and wrap it up. Yeah, go for it, Jeff.
No, I didn't have anything else to say. I was literally just here to say thank you. I had a great time.
Oh no, it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you to you guys. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if because I know that a couple of you sort of came in relatively late and haven't necessarily had a chance to meet us all in the studio in the background. So there's sort of Rob and Charles floating around making everything work as well, with whom I've had the great pleasure of jamming and stuff online and doing things for ages and playing in person. And it's actually really intriguing how we've been doing stuff that visually looks that similar, but ideologically is very different, in that we've literally been plugging stuff in and making some noise and doing some free jamming and enjoying like company of doing those things, and that's really cool. So I mean, yeah, I don't know if you've noticed in the chat on the side, that side I think it is, there's a sort of post Zoom or post event Zoom chill out. Come and join us, and we'd all have a natter and continue this afterwards if you're still about, and yeah, it's great, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks so much.
There's been some wonderful comments, and yeah, it's great to see your work. So, yeah,
All right. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
Thanks for joining
there
us.
we go. Yeah, totally. So that kind of brings us towards the last piece, which initially was, or hopefully was going to be stuff with some of your students, in fact, with your teaching hat on, who, for various summer student reasons, for whatever, aren't able to be with us. So I've just chucked a piece of mine into the ring.
Excellent. Brilliant.
Yeah. Before we go on to that, I should say that we've got a link for coffee.com, which is basically a way to try and sort of fund this studio, because we're all doing it for free. All of the artists and musicians are doing their stuff for free without the sort of any of that or any payment. Coffee.com actually just helps pay for the studio. So if you want to literally go and buy us coffee towards this, then thank you so much. It funds the streaming. If not, don't worry. Give people a like, a share, a comment, all of those things. Right, that's the horrible mercenary stuff done, because that always makes me feel a bit weird. But yeah, next up, we have a piece of mine that's kind of a bit of a placeholder, but might not be, because we've talked so much about embodiment of work and being together and new ways of addressing dialogue about sort of people and sort of performance and all of those things. And partway through the lockdown, I was involved with doing stuff with the Metamorphosis Festival, as you mentioned earlier, Milo. And I did a piece that was originally supposed to be an installation piece for them that was going to be projected AV with live processing of sounds as people going past, which was supposed to be talking or literally picking up on people talking and embodiment of voice and all of those things. And then the realization over time came by that actually, yes, we can do this two ways. If it has to be online, people could dial in and maybe conversing essentially with this thing, that there would be some sort of algorithmic or sort of processing way that this could affect what was going on with the visual side of it and the audio side of it. And in doing so, in case there was nobody there, I actually built in a sort of almost a fail-safe background thing that if nothing happened and if nobody came along, it would still be doing something. And almost that with a kind of slightly old school head on, almost at risk, or became at risk of becoming a sort of concert version thing of something that people could then go and mess with and enjoy and interact with. So weirdly, because it never had the chance to be as an online thing, hopefully this is an opportunity for it just to have that airing as such, you know, and hopefully people kind of dig that and like it. And yeah, Milo, if you want to play devil's advocate on it, then by all means seriously do so, because there's quite a lot of thought gone into it and not much, and a lot of things that people could pick up on that might not actually have been intentional. So yeah, AV piece called Homunculus, and we'll just go with that because Charles is saying don't give it away. There you are, Milo. Thank you very much, sir.
Bravo.
Oh, thank you.
Bravo.
Yeah.
So, few questions emerge from that. The first being around the title, which is a figure I'm well familiar with, the homunculus.
Yes.
I'm just looking at Wikipedia here, that seeing the first appearance of the homunculus as a figure, which is from Paracelsus, 1493 to 1541, who outlines his method for curating homunculi. And I wonder how this maps on your own process.
Swine.
So I'm just interested to sort of compare and contrast your two methodologies. So Paracelsus writes that his method for curating homunculi is that the sperm of a man be putrefied by itself in a sealed cucurbit for 40 days with the highest degree of putrefaction in a horse's womb, or at least so long that it comes to life and moves itself and stirs, which is easily observed. He goes on, but I will go no further. So talk so for you, the figure of the homunculus, a little human being somehow. Do you want to sort of initially sort of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I was sort of trying to get to was this idea of having an other embodied being that we have, that we're sort of listening to or observing almost, in that there is this sort of semi sort of biological or organic thing on the screen that is somehow a reflection and an imposition of our own society's kind of ideas and concepts, which I think that sort of homunculus thing kind of is, in that you kind of taking what you regard as being human and conflating it into something other, which I think that, given what was maybe that alchemy kind of side of it back then, is possibly where we are now in terms of digital technologies and all of those things. I mean, the crossover points between being able to say magic words in a correct order and then all of a sudden go, yes, I'm saying magic words in a correct order. Well, actually, yeah, I've got some human speech and I'm running it through Super Collider and granulating it, and I've typed these words in the correct order and it's doing granulation, sort of thing. And feels like there's this very big crossover between that sort of maybe pre-scientific kind of culture, in that they felt like there was a preserve of knowledge in amongst a certain part of society, and the same way that we are now with just some of the sort of digital arts, in that many people will come and engage with something and have absolutely no idea what this thing is, and it will seem like witchcraft, or somehow feel really quite unnerving and semi-organic. And you kind of look at it, and maybe that feels uncomfortable, maybe it feels nice and like a living thing, but it crosses over into that place. And I think that was what I was trying to achieve and throw out, with the idea of then being able to mirror back into society and our own perceptions of being an individual and being in a group and being in a space, and those things which at that point have been denied to us for so long, you know.
Absolutely, and for sure it has this register of the uncanny or the unhomely in some of those deconstructions of language. And I wonder, are you familiar with the discourse around media archaeology and deep time of the media at all? People like Zelensky and Kittler and people like that?
To some extent, but I feel I might be about to be schooled on it. Where are we going with this?
No, not at all. It's just that.
No. I'm intrigued to hear and learn. Yeah.
You very sort of evocatively make that connection between magic and new media, if you like. And, you know, for those who are out...
That's a basic Asimov kind of moment, isn't it, really, you know?
You know, those who are out of the magic circle, if you know, you look at a mobile phone, for example, and it is essentially a magical object. You know, it's like it transports you through time and place, and it does strange things with memory. And, you know, so Kittler and Zelensky look at these, you know, for example, computers have a much longer history than one of the 20th century. You know, kind of, they process the development of mathematics and computation and algorithm derives from Arabic, you know.
Absolutely.
And looking at some of those decolonized histories of technology, and the figure of the magical and the fantastical has always been quite closely associated with the development and evolution of technology from a certain perspective. You know, from another perspective, it's monstrous, you know. And so just thinking about what we've been talking about today from everyone about it feels like what your work is sort of like John's, reflecting on new realities a little bit. And he talked a lot about intent. And so, you know, in magic, with chaos magic, the idea of intent and manifesting change in the world is a key sort of part of magical practice. But then I suppose it also has either an association as a consequence of new technology and our own implementations of that. There were other issues coming up about, you know, interesting questions around glitch and the idea of sort of the breakdown of systems, and a reflection on those moments of breakdown, a bit like the work with Nick and Jeff and Anna and everyone there about meaning making and the many layers of potential meaning, you know, with its visual or sonic or relational or environmental or contextual or political. So I'm leading to a final question, which I'm going to, which is about, you know, what for you is music. But before anticipating that, I'd just like to, you know, as a practitioner, how do you approach making? How do you approach art making? You know, what is your practice? Yeah, how do you work, and what is important to you?
Okay, I think to be honest, as far as I go, the actual finished artifact is probably not as important as the progression to that space, in that I will be one of those people who will try and develop a concept and try and unpick it and try and work it round and rattle it about, and maybe even a couple of different things. For instance, within this, I mean, a large part of it was obviously about how to engage with people, society. Oh yeah, obviously human voice, really interesting, really obvious one, no brainer. Right, let's do some of that. The other part of it was going, right, how do we make this something that would be visual, that works, and that actually sort of thought about, okay, let's play around with jitter, do some stuff that makes a sphere and reacts in terms of volume. Okay, that looks a bit like a cell or an eye or a something. And then had some footage of the sky with clouds going past, going, right, if we change the hue of that then, rather than being blue and white for the sky and the clouds, is all of a sudden red and white. And you put those together and you've got this thing that feels kind of really organic, to the point where you're looking at it and you're listening to people, and there's this thing that you kind of not quite sure if it's an eye or a cell or possibly a star or something a bit obscene that you shouldn't be looking at, and you kind of jam those ideas together, and then almost the actual idea of the fine detail of a work, you have that sort of point whereby you get to going, okay, I've got this overall sketch of a concept and a thing I want to pull together, and sometimes some of those elements pull together in surprising ways, and then sort of almost resolve the fine detail as you go down. I mean, I know when we were talking earlier, I mean, you mentioned microsound and as a book, and these various different levels and layers of compositional structure or artistic structure in a broader sense, whereby you look at sort of macro, micro, meta, blah blah blah, whichever way you look at it, and sort of nesting those within each other. And personally, I'm one of those people who works sort of from the top down, who sort of finds it really hard to get my teeth into something unless I go, yeah, that idea, that thing, that's going to do that. And then you try and find ways to implement it, which, as a sort of digital person, I find that quite a rewarding and interesting way to work, because that sort of fits with the idea of coding or any of those things, in that it tends to work a lot better if you roughly know what you're doing when you start out. But I think also the concept with some of that was that I actually wanted it to feel a bit familiar and a bit, I wouldn't say old school, but I think in its nature and its practice it is. I mean, there's a very deliberate use of stuff like GRM tools hiding in the processing, that for anybody who knows it and gets the joke will sort of will hear it, you know. I mean, there's the sort of there's that side of it. And so yeah, that was talking about the process, or the sort of compositional process, on one level or another. But I can't remember what the other question, or the other half of the question was now.
No, that's great. So anticipating, it's interesting to sort of see your working practices, and the sort of thought that you've sort of triggered in my mind. You know, it relates to this idea of then, you know, of structure more broadly. You know, at what levels does structure exist, and what is the nature of that structure, and what is the nature of that organization, whether it's organized externally or it's something that comes from within, or maybe even those terms are completely irrelevant. You know, I'm thinking about, say, for example, plant structures, for example, you know, or the shapes of our bodies, you know. And, you know, drawing it into, say, you know, Curtis Rhodes talking about just compositional approaches, about the, you know, there's a micro level, the individual grain, if you like, the note, if you consider it that at that particular moment. Then there's the meso level, whether that's horizontal or vertical.
Yeah.
You know, you know, then a kind of a macro level, the composition more broadly, but then there's also then a meta level, and the spaces in which things exist take meaning and have context, as the thought that's triggered in my mind, which seems a bit abstract, but in the relationship between the choices between that individual compositional choice of that element here, either in terms of frequency or in terms of time, and then how does that relate to another type of structure, whether that is horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's the way you've sort of got me thinking. And then I suppose it's the meaning making. How then do those sounds and practices relate to one's own identity? How does it relate to audiences and other people? And how does that relate to the broader kind of ecosystems in which we inhabit? So where I'm sort of leading you with this is then, thinking in an audio visual context, what for you now is music?
What for me now is music. Okay, breaking it down from an audio-visual context, I will take the very first easy option and go from the start and say it's audio rather than visual, which probably is fairly bold for that sort of thing. But fundamentally for me, for something to be musical, it's a sonic or a heard experience, which actually, to unpack that feels very, very strange, in that then we kind of we look at, I don't know, some of the wonderful graphic scores from sort of early 20th century, or you look at the abstract works by people like Kandinsky, or indeed you go and listen to I don't know, antiphonal music in a cathedral, and it's so much embodied within that space and the surround and all of that you couldn't do that in somewhere else. But I mean, for me, it's primarily a sonic experience. As far as not getting caught into Varese quotes, I think there is a line between, or intention and reception, whereby we have something that is primarily communicated as utterance, which is something that I was slightly playing with this piece, in that you have the point whereby you're talking to someone, and that is primarily functional to communicate ideas and concepts in a day-to-day, most efficient method. Can we have a cup of tea? It's very easy to say, to articulate that in a musical sense. If you tried to ask somebody for a cup of tea via the medium of string quartet, you'd probably be there for a while. Just to make it really daft. But actually, that kind of maybe embodies it, and you have this sort of thing that actually, part of it is that, for me, music is a sonic thing that carries different layers of information and meaning, or heightened layers of information and meaning, so that you're not just primarily looking at this single line of stuff that maybe has a few tiny little harmonics above it that, okay, yes, you've said this, something is resonating up there, you've said this in this language, you've said this in this tone of voice, and so on, or someone's hooted a car horn, and because you're out in the middle of a street rather than in a garage selling cars where they're all stationary, there's that different level of meaning. But yeah, I think for me, it's actually about the level of information that you're trying to convey within the wider work. beyond the simple things whereby we talk about, say, encyclopedia entry. There is a need for clarity and concision. There's a horrendous amount of information in there, but actually contained within that, there aren't that many overtones or inferences you can take that. Then when you start to get towards things like reading, to quote a hackneyed example, Joyce's Ulysses or something else like that, you start to get towards something which in your head you're interpreting the sounds of having many different layers of metaphor and inference. Yeah, I think that's just kind of where I'm coming from.
That's
Trying
really
to nuance it a bit, you know.
It's really, really fascinating, and of course, you know, there is no single answer to what music is. You know,
No, absolutely.
It's I'm not, you know, expecting anybody to give me that answer by asking the question.
Great, I'll open the reserve chute. Thank you very much.
You know, it enables thought about it, and just some of the way that I'm thinking about it at the moment, informed somewhat by Christopher Small's writing about musicking. I don't know if you've come across that, and just taking a sort of a counter, just being sort of deliberately contrary, just for the sake of it, because it's kind of fun to take a sort of.
It is kind of fun, and I knew I was getting in deep, putting a piece.
Not at all. No, not at all. But to kind of like sort of set up a range of possibilities.
Absolutely,
you know, it's asking what can music be?
Yeah.
You know, and rather than thinking I know what it is and this is what it must be, it's thinking it's like, especially now, post-COVID, you know, in this moment of profound societal transition, you know, for us all to reflect on what music does, what does it do, and who does it do it for?
Yeah.
So Small, for example, you know, says that like the sonic aspects of music is only a very small part of what music is. You know, music involves everything from the security guy at the door and the ticket sales and the instrument designer and the person who buys the strings or the person who tidies up after the gig. You know, it involves the musicians, but it also involves the sound engineer. You know, it involves the critics, it involves the reviewers, it involves the audience in quite profound kind of ways.
Yep.
Yes, and you know that a formalistic definition of music, meaning that music is just organized sound, misses this broader context where real musical meaning exists, which is in that interaction between sounds and people in society. And that has completely transformed my understanding about what it is that I'm doing as a musician. And sort of being able to participate in a thing like today, where it has this profound, your intentions, it seems, with this and everyone involved, you know, Rob and Charles, is relational and it's social.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and that is a vital part of what music is music, if anyone at all decides it is. Well, okay, we'll continue this. We will continue this.
I think that's one for the post-gig Zoom moment.
Yeah, someone has said this to me before. So if I call a fish a hat, does it make that fish a hat? No, it's still a fish. You know.
Yes.
You know, just because I call something doesn't make it so.
No.
You know, and just because I know this from experience, or just because I intend something to be music. Touche. Yes. I have a new fish hat.
Yes, I think. Oh, it just got silly.
We can get into this. This is leading to somewhere interesting. Yeah. You know, if I intend to use the fish as a hat, it's just a fish on my head. You know.
Well, I guess it depends if it's a flatfish that keeps the rain off, you know. I mean, if you've got a good place or a dome of soul, you're all right. But if you've just got a mackerel, you've got no hope, have you? You know, I mean, the sardine is just not going to do the job on a rainy day.
Unless you're a homunculus with a tiny, tiny little head.
Yes, absolutely. Oh dear me.
I
Right.
don't think we've got any more. Where can we go after this?
Possibly 0 viewers. I have no idea. Oh dear me. But yeah,
Apologies.
no. It's great. I think this is the sort of dialogue and wonderful silliness that we all should be doing, you know. And it's exploring stuff and doing things, and yeah, and putting fish on your head.
Or hats in the ocean. Maybe that's the other.
Maybe that's it, you know. I mean, maybe. Well, let's face it, you know, it's going out on a rainy day. Yep. So yeah, yes, Mum, I'll put my manta ray on.
I'm going hatting with my hatting rod.
Yes, absolutely.
You know. Anyway,
Yeah.
where have we ended up? We were all quite sensible for a while, and
We were, and then I grabbed a glass of wine to prove myself against your questions, and we all ended up with the aquatic animals on our heads.
Result.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess at that point we probably should actually make some sort of attempt to say thank you to all the people involved and bring things to a bit of a close. And we can all carry on and do the whole thing on Zoom, which is somewhere up in the chat for all of us not in there. So yeah, thank you so much to all the people involved this evening. We've had John Williams, we've had Adam Boyes as Electric Coast, we've had Nick and his ensemble, who I've still not quite figured out totally how to pronounce, but you were amazing and thank you so much. And we've had Charles and Rob floating around in the background looking after us, and yeah, huge thanks to Milo, who's put us all through the rinse and the ringer. Have you got any links for your work as well? Because given the level of interrogation and clarity of thought, I would imagine there will be a few people who are wanting to engage with what you're doing.
I have, over the last year or so, removed everything of my past from online. Because I had no interest in that type of work anymore. I've started a new project, and I hope perhaps I could present that to you here, for example.
Yeah, totally. You are more than welcome.
I've just been gigging it for the first time over the last month or so down here in London. I'm always looking for places to play and perform it. It's an audio visual thing about psychoacoustics and listening, and like just troubling this idea about what's the minimum that music can be. Yeah, somehow. I don't know if I quite achieved that.
So that's the ultimate teaser. Dial back here at some point and see if your work is here, I guess, you know. So all of you people out in internet land, please come back when you can and see when Milo's work is here, because it will be a pleasure and an honor to have you back as an artist as well as someone to chat to. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you to all those people that put up with us. We've got the coffee.com going along the bottom. For those artists and people, dive into the chat and quickly copy down the Zoom for later and nattering. We've got the next deep dive happening on the 15th, which is basically one artist, one work, long range sort of natter podcast thing, and we'll be back on the last Tuesday of next month and hopefully each month. And thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, I've just got a message. It might be a long topic instead of artists, which, given how we've been delving into some long topics today, it might be one to unpack. Thank you so much. Night, everybody. No start.